Oops. Hello, everybody. I don't know what happened there. Yes, and tonight, welcome. Yeah, I'm back with my wildlife crime experts. I want to hear what's happening on his side of the world, how the New Year's treated him, and yeah, what's happening in the bush.
Hey everybody,
Welcome,
yeah,
Ashwell.
thanks very much. I'm sitting near Open Gate in my house near the Central Kruger, so sending my best to everybody wherever you are in SA and further as well.
Yes.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, we've also been always meaning to do a stream earlier, but it was raining cats and dogs not so long ago. And we were getting all sorts of images with the bridges starting to get precariously underwater. So what was happening on your side?
Yeah, so when Cyclone Freddy, and I mean, it's an amazing story because Cyclone Freddy started actually in Western Indonesia, and it traveled all the way across that portion of the Pacific into the Indian Ocean, and then obviously hit a portion of Mauritius and Madagascar on the way in, and then sat. We were all waiting. It sat in the Mozambican Channel for a bit, and at this time of year, the Mozambican Channel is the water is still very warm in terms of the current, and it just actually fed Freddy. So then Freddy made landfall. And initially we thought, no, it's going to go maybe a little bit further north and rather hit eastern Zimbabwe and southern Malawi and central and northern Mozambique. But this time it didn't. So it was quite a rare thing for us, and it came in quite hard. And the south of the park and the central portion of the park got pretty heavily hit. So within 12 hours, all gravel and dirt roads were closed because they're the most prone to washing away. And even some of the tar roads were closed. So Skukuza itself became an island for a while. There was no ways of reaching it on any road. And so people with money were flown out and braved the weather. So, yeah, that was, and we worried about Freddy too, because Freddy didn't break up. Freddy went back into the Mozambican Channel and is making landfall again soon. And I think if I get it right, it might be one of the, it might be a global record. I think between 1899 and a funny date, I can't remember the other date, there hasn't been a storm, not necessarily of this magnitude, but that has lasted so long.
So it's
Everything.
basically bouncing back through that channel between us and Madagascar.
Yeah, exactly. And that warm water is just kind of feeding it. And it's very interesting. Also, we had a storm system come in South Africa from more the southeast, and they kind of almost connected, which is why KZN also took such a heavy hit. So a couple of places like the Chokwani section, which is just kind of north of Skukuza, they got 300 mils of rain in less than 10 hours, which pretty much is kind of instant flash flood warning. And then obviously the storm hit the escarpment a bit, and that's when the flood started also coming into Kruger as well. So yeah.
A lot of damage, a lot of animals sort of, or do they just sort of head for higher ground and?
So, as usual, the animals are generally smarter than the humans, more in tune with everything, and so they can hear the flood coming. Generally, even a flash flood. So the hippos are obviously hippos, elephant, and crocs are generally the most at risk, and sometimes buffalo. But they definitely detected and moved to higher ground. So the animals pretty much figure it out very quickly because we know sound in water, sound travels better in water. So once the rain really started falling very heavily in the escarpment area, that actually brought the real force of water. because by the time you get into low veld, the rivers start meandering. At high altitudes, they normally, squeeze in between mountains and that kind of thing. Yes, Debbie, you spot on. The animals are very wise to storms. The only thing that really catches them out is probably lightning. That's one thing the animals can't figure out or can't escape easily is lightning. But we didn't really have much. We had a couple of bad thunderstorms, but the storm itself dropped tons of water. It kind of missed the northern portion of the park, which is actually still very dry right now. Pafuri, Crook's Corner, that end of things, it was kind of a bit of an anomaly. But yeah, lots of camps. There's been camp damage to some of the infrastructure. Things like power generators, they had to really kind of kick in with that. To kind of run services and things like game drives obviously stopped because you can't, particularly the concessions that are allowed to go off road, getting stuck is quite likely, and you don't want to get stuck in some of these soils and things like that. So yeah, we were grateful for rain, but not on this magnitude. I mean, the park is now looking absolute. It's the best I've seen it probably in 15 years. It's verdant, emerald green. It's really
go to the park, people, before winter. Go to your parks.
Yeah,
support the national parks.
Yes, no, please do come visit. Easter's coming up as well, so it's definitely worthwhile popping in and seeing it in the state it is right now. So yeah, animals are good. Humans struggled a bit, and now to talk on the human side, many of the local communities bordering on the western edge of the park, obviously there were lots of issues, lots of the roads that weren't in good condition anyway, got badly damaged. So staff of mine and my team, I would just say to them, stay at home. Don't risk it. You don't want to get stuck in the mud, or there's a flash flood. Get caught on a low water bridge. And yeah, I do have to tell a funny story, if I may.
Of course.
There was a guy near Lower Sabi who, the theory, I don't know if it's been proven, because I'm sure it'll end up not maybe in court, but he'll get some kind of fine if he hasn't already, attempted to cross the low water bridge near Lower Sabi camp. You can see the bridge just southeast along the river. And the water had already risen a bit above the low water bridge. And that, by the way, is the warning. Don't then try and drive over, because as soon as you change gear and you draw water through your exhaust into your car, it's game over. So he was in a polo. He attempted it, and he did it quite late, and he ran into trouble and got stuck. And eventually the water really started rising, and he was forced out of the vehicle. He had to swim, and he ended up managing to make it to a rock. So you can imagine the terror this guy must have had, plus the humor for some of us who are like this. It's terribly funny.
No, I would poop myself. Like, there's crocodiles like just over there. There's a hippo over there. Yeah, no.
So he spent the night on the rock, and only in the morning did somebody spot him. The water was so bad. Luckily, the crocs and hippos get out of the way with the floods, so he didn't have a risk of that. But the water kept on rising, and he made it to quite a big rock, and he was very lucky that it wasn't completely swamped.
It was not his time.
No. They sent a jet ski. They had to organize a jet ski to get to him because they couldn't reach him. Sam Parks, Kruger does have some boats and things like that, but they couldn't get to him. So they sent a jet ski to fetch him. His car, I think, is now in Mozambique somewhere because it was away. So I think there's somebody with a well-washed polo, In Mozambique, the engine probably doesn't work, but
It's
somebody's
stinky,
got to,
needs to be sunned
yeah,
out a bit.
yeah, it probably needs
Excuse
a
me.
bit of work. So that was the humor moment. It sounds terrible because
No, no,
of
I think,
the
and that's the thing. People really think they're invincible and they can overcome. And yes, we do have a set of skills, and we do have some of us have brains, some more than others. But yeah, don't go walking into trouble. No.
yeah.
Nick says here, come visit the parks and remember to bring, what is the most common thing that people forget to bring that is so important? Allergy stuff, I suppose, EpiPens.
Yeah, well, if you've got chronic medication, don't forget it, and make sure if you do have it sounds terrible, but if you've got a condition, make sure that if you come with a partner or whatever, or if you're on your own, just make sure that people know, because a lot of the time, if something goes wrong, it's not always easy to sort out, particularly with the distances involved in Kruger. And also just, make sure you bring, if you've got power banks and those kind of things, like for cell phones and all of that. The park, funny enough, has a lot of generators. A lot of the camps are okay with load shedding, so that's a positive. But just always make sure you're equipped. And then in summer, always bring, if you get bitten by mosquitoes regularly, then bring
Mozzie
anti-mozzie
repellent.
spray and all of
Yeah.
that.
So I see someone says here, so hippos can't swim after all. Or is that just a that's just Nick being funny? Oh.
They tend to float, and then they almost doggy paddle.
Doggy
So
paddle on the.
yeah, so they doggy paddle, but most of the time they actually walk on the bottom. That's why you don't really get them like in Lake Kariba in Zimbabwe. Not that there's much water. Well, I think there might be now after all this rain, but the hippos don't like congregate in the middle at the deepest parts. And everything. That's why when in the park you see them moving between sand bars and sandbanks and everything. And and that's also part of their role. So they also create channels. So that's the ecological function of hippos as well. They create channels and keep waterways open. And why that's also a warning sign if you ever go walking on the edge of a water hole or a river where there's lots of hippos, if you see gaps between the reeds and they're quite wide, then game is moving in and out of there, and most likely hippos. So you've got to be careful with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. Hippos are not to be played with. Or not to be, hello moo cow, hello sea cow. No. Alrighty, so obviously our theme, we spoke about what we were going to chat about. I know we sort of started off on a bit of another note, but you recently went to a expo, let me call it that, where you were sort of updated over the past 2 years what's been happening in your world with crime and wildlife and poaching and everything. But so tell us a little bit about those figures and how it's evolved and how more people are becoming aware and what's actually, positively happening now. People are,
it was it was a transnational organized crime gathering, which doesn't happen too often. So what was great is it's like people who work in the policy space, like myself, with academics, and then people that are very operational. And so we had very senior police officials there, but not the politicians. I'll say that now, not political appointments, but
you mean guys that actually still try and do the work.
Yeah, so it was very positive. We had colonels and sort of police that lead kind of the charge operationally and have big teams under them. So that was really nice to see, because we know in South Africa a lot of that narrative is controlled in terms of how things are communicated to everybody. So it was really good. I mean, we covered a whole range of things from human trafficking to light arms and firearm trafficking. That's obviously as a linked interest. So if you in kind of working in the wildlife crime space, you also keep an eye on the arms trafficking space, because often the two go together, and particularly for large mammals. So elephants and rhino, you either got to shoot them, or which is happens sometimes, the elephants, they get poisoned at waterholes and things. It's been a thing that's happened in the past. But on the positive upside, I know a lot of people are probably quite critical that we've lost so many rhino, for example, but we've had in some areas on the edge of the Kruger, we've not had rhino poaching, a rhino poached in almost 3 years. So that's really good. And in the Kruger itself, the numbers are quite low. Yes, it's getting harder to poach because the response is much tighter. So South Africa is getting what I would call some mid-wins, where we're seeing some improved jail sentences, and those are going up and up. So now there were also prosecutors, by the way. Part of the reason we had this, let's call it workshop conference thing, was also to train prosecutors on wildlife crime, so they can understand how to think about a case and how to work with an investigating officer, and how to really work on it. And so I think for everybody, it's almost like the Al Capone approach. If you can't get the criminal on poaching, you start hitting them on other things. So one of the nice, really great things that has happened is that they're now using money laundering, what we call anti-money laundering techniques, or follow the money, with follow the guns and follow the poachers, and they're using that entire thing as the strategy.
Holistically, they're doing a holistic approach.
Exactly. Right. And so some of you might have seen on the news, they've spoken about now the 14th ranger that's been arrested. Of course, that's a little bit depressing, but it's actually a really positive win. They've arrested ex-policemen, ex-rangers, some existing rangers, and what that is showing is they have the ability to deal with the rot, the corruption inside. So poaching is really, right now, it's really about corruption and being enabled by corruption. So that was really good. South Africa's kind of on the up when it comes to that. The only problem child right now is really KZN. It's struggling a little bit with its poaching. And Izimvelo, some of you might remember Natal Parks Board, it's called Izimvelo Wildlife. They are struggling internally, but I think we all know they're going to have to address the elephant in the room, which is the corruption, and have good leadership, because that's what it boils down to. You've got to have good leadership and good governance and ethics, and those are the three things that really make a difference. And I know a lot of people are probably a little bit fatigued with the whole thing in South Africa right now around corruption, but we are seeing some light in terms of wildlife crime and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
That's why I knew I had to reach out, and just because I'm actually, when I think of the possibilities here in the cities and what's happening, I'm just like, oh, where's the exit strategy? What's happening? But well, it's good to hear that wildlife, that people, is government becoming more involved? Are they realizing, like, who's now our new Minister of Tourism? I don't even know. Some chop who, I don't know, who was the former, I don't even know. I'm not even going to guess.
Patricia
Oh, yes, her. Yeah, okay, go figure. Well, maybe she loves, I don't know, like.
Yeah, luckily, tourism actually doesn't get too involved. In the previous, in previous times, it was the National Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism. Now it's just the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So that's Barbara Creasy, and she survived the cabinet cull that happened earlier this week with the president. Obviously, the one thing that some of us are not happy about is Becky Cele is still Minister of Police, and the only time we see him is when there's somebody, and I'm not anti-musicians, but when that guy, AKA, got shot in Durban on Florida Road.
I mean, it's a high-profile case.
Yeah. So and again, I'm not nailing a German tourist, but when the German tourist got shot, then suddenly down to the south of here, then there was suddenly a lot of action. So many of us are not impressed by that, but nonetheless, good work is happening. And I can publicly say there's a new head of Hawks for Mpumalanga province, Major General Nico, I think it's Bester, and there's a new Major General for the Hawks in Limpopo and a new one in Northwest. And they're all high-performing guys. I've met the one for Mpumalanga, and he kind of just went to everybody at the other forum. He kind of said, let me just work inside a bit first. And that was quite euphemistically put. He's basically saying, I need to clean up inside whilst I get Mpumalanga right. So they obviously, in his case, he's been brought in as an axeman, as we would say, to clean up corruption in the Hawks ranks in Mpumalanga and then reset their strategy. So very, very positive. I was very fortunate to spend time with him and some of his colonels. And the guys are trying hard, and they've come off hard bats. They've had a few assassinations. One of their high-performing colonels was killed about 3-4 years ago. So the guys have had a tough time. But if you look at some of the cases in the Skakuza court, things are kind of happening really nicely, as I like to say, which means better sentences.
When it's good, it's really nicely.
Yeah, so it's happening very nicely. I can see the guys are putting a lot of effort and everything. So it's there's some good news stories in the wildlife side for sure. Probably the only concern, well, not only one, but one that we're keeping an eye on is the rise in pangolin poaching in South
I
Africa.
read that. I was like shocked. What's that figure again?
So there's a global figure. We haven't quantified it fully, but there's about 26 cases now. Actually, it could be a little bit more since last week. There's about 26 cases open in terms of investigations into pangolin trade. Our guys in South Africa, the criminals that are attempting this, are not nearly sophisticated as the rhino poaching guys or the pangolin poachers in Central Africa, where the other 3 species occur. We have only got one, the Temenings or ground pangolin, and it's very opportunistic. So there's been some stings. These guys have been quite stupid, some of these criminals. I think there was a successful sting operation in the East Rand of Joburg, where the car walked into a trap and got sorted out. And likewise with a few that have happened in Limpopo. We just got to keep an eye on it, because like rhino is kind of dropping and has been dropping. And yes, we know the numbers are a lot lower. Yes, I think everybody can admit that, but the responses are becoming more proactive. With pangolin, it's an emerging trend. So the uptick, what we've got to do now in typical law enforcement speak is disrupt as much as we can early on. And that's kind of part of the magic mix with dealing with transnational crime and even local crime. The earlier you disrupt it, the better chance you have later of suppressing it and having good outcomes in the courts and things like that as well. So yeah, pangolin is a worry that we're keeping an eye on, but it's not remotely close to what's happening in Central Africa, which is on a much bigger scale. Yeah.
Now, I hope Patricia should, I don't know, I mean, they don't really get involved, but I just hope that there's some sort of awareness, because we have the most beautiful country in the whole world, and people want to come here. Our rand is now so weak that it's cheap for all. I know I've got family coming from London. I mean, it's investment. It's just like, wake up, like, I think, people need to realize, like, this is the place to be. And with more investment, more feet, more travel comes more jobs, So we need our animals. But yeah, so tell me, in terms of like trafficking, so what, like human, so it starts off with, so the chain reaction. So it's like a knock-on effect, right? Or like, so what is the main sort of focus? Is it is the end goal the human trafficking, or is it just everything? It's weapons, drugs,
Yeah, so
smuggling.
Yeah, so the top one is narcotics globally. Top one for trafficking is narcotics. That's generally followed by I wouldn't say light firearms, but arms trafficking overall, then human trafficking, and then wildlife. Those are kind of the four. There are others below them, but the amounts, like with wildlife trade, and we call it like illegal wildlife trafficking. It's quite a difficult animal to deal with, to excuse the metaphor, but it's quite a difficult animal to deal with if you don't start addressing it locally. So you can't just kind of, okay, we can lose rhinos, or whatever. It happens to be pangolins or elephants. So the trafficking thing is sometimes the same organization. So sometimes, like, we know firearms are needed to poach rhinos and elephants. So there's an arms trafficker involved. And what we've seen is it's not like the good old days of the mafia, where it was hierarchical, that you've got the boss or the kingpin of the overall gang or mafia grouping, like the 'Ndrangheta from Italy. It's more a network now. So they actually have become a little bit more sophisticated, and they almost rent their services out to each other that are in their circle of trust. So you're having smaller, tighter groups, and that's what we've learned with wildlife crime. So yes, our big target is to catch higher level individuals in the trafficking chain. So from committing the initial crime right through to the local supervisor or the transporter. And I think the last time we spoke, we saw with COVID, a whole lot of crime dropped. And last week was interesting to hear, because of the lack of movement, the hawks, the narcotics trade dropped very sharply in South Africa in the hard lockdown, for the obvious reasons that they couldn't move product. And that just shows the importance of keeping an eye on having, and I know it sounds very old school, but having checkpoints, making sure that there's regular visible policing and that kind of thing happening. So that's the one element. And then, because it's become so transnational in nature, so like we know with narcotics, Durban is one of the hotspots. And in the last,
where it comes in always, we don't really make, I mean, I wouldn't know, like, I don't know. Look, I think, I mean, compared to the odd shroom or cannabinoid or whatever, in terms of things like, I don't know how these things are made. Look, in our days, we did a little bit of LSD and I don't know, methamphetamine, whatever. But I mean, yeah, no. But we don't really make it in this country. We sort of bring it in. And
yeah,
I mean,
so we're a transshipment hub. So what happens is right now, and like I'll get to some good news. There are three major cartel groupings that are coming out of Sao Paulo. So one of them is the 'Ndrangheta from Italy, but they're a smaller player. Then there's like a Serbian, Bulgarian kind of mix. And then there's a hardcore, typical Brazilian big cartel. And what they do is they transship to Durban, and it gets repackaged and moved around, and then it goes out again. Some comes into the South African market because we're also a market as well for them. Obviously not a market that produces a lot of money for them, but still it's worthwhile. You've got to, if you use a criminal mindset and you try and get into a criminal's mind, you're going to have to give incentives to the local guys that are helping you transship and move stuff on. So a statistic for everybody, between not more than 3 to 8% of all container shipping in the world is actually physically checked. So containers that are coming into ports, only 3% of them are actually physically. Yeah. So the maritime aspect of moving drugs is a biggie, and that's kind of a typical one. It takes longer, obviously, and your shiploads, your containers you've got to take the risk of putting in quite a lot into a couple of containers. So there's a term we use. It's called rip on, rip off. So what happens is a container might be processed in Sao Paulo. The original barcode and the lock is put on, but then fake ones are used, and they break it off, and then they put the stuff in, and then they relock it and reseal it again. And that's been a bit of a challenge, but now they're kind of starting to get there. And believe it or not, it's dogs that are helping. They're starting to use canines, and a lot of these shipping containers have exit vents on the top right or left, particularly if they're refrigerated. And they're also using them for human trafficking. And you can put a special filter on, put it on, you leave it on for a few seconds, and you do it forensically, so gloves and everything. Then you remove it and you give it to the dog to sniff. And the dog can often detect whether there's humans in there, and also the two types of explosives, because that's obviously also something with arms trafficking. So ammonium nitrate or chlorine-based explosives, and then certain kinds of wildlife products. So a lot of dogs are trained, they can smell ivory, rhino horn, pangolin scales, those kind of things. So if it's not, and narcotics, of course. So that's, I know it sounds a bit perverse, but it's an exciting space because it's quite a simple tool to use. You don't
to catch them.
To catch them, exactly. So Durban has been highlighted as a problem child and everything. And so like the customs, which actually falls under SARS, they've kind of been saying, well, it's not really our thing to deal with, it's the police's thing, and it's the usual sidestepping.
Yeah, sloping shoulders.
Yes.
Sloping shoulders, like my mother would say.
Yeah.
Really,
but we're keeping an eye on it. Yeah, we're keeping an eye on it.
But that's good.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on it, and just to follow up, Europol, which is like the European police organization of all its member states, they are actually dismantling right now the European. I'm not sure which one of the three that they're in right now. In the last 10 days, are dismantling one of those cartels' European presence. So they've caught them at the ports that they're using, mainly in the Mediterranean and everything. They've caught them and they've set them up. And they've also cracked one of the, and it just shows you, criminals, they had designed an encrypted messaging app. And Europol actually broke it, and they've read thousands of messages, sorry, and they are now dismantling that cartel, or at least its European leg, which is very exciting because, you know, if you look at all of these things, narcotics is also a gateway to other problems. So once you get people hooked, it creates a whole subculture, particularly with the hard drugs, we know. And that breaks families, and like we've seen in the Southwestern Cape, particularly, it's, you know, there are different markets. Usual cocaine, although that's become more accessible in the lower end, but like in my time as a teenager, it's like cocaine was what that only rich people could get afford to get cocaine. You know, so yeah, so there's some really good news with Europol making some ground on that. And, you know, these are things that we just got to keep on ticking at, keep on pushing. Relationships count as well. So keeping those relationships. And I don't know if people have noticed when Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary of America, visited South Africa about a month ago, they formed a task force on looking at the follow the money components around wildlife crime in America and wildlife crime in South Africa. So just for everybody's insight, the second biggest destination for illegal wildlife products in the world is?
We've said this before. In America, not
Yes.
America.
So America is number 2 in terms of demand for illegal wildlife products and wildlife trafficking. So that's a biggie. And that's why the Americans, I think, are starting to pay attention. Also because of diaspora. You can you've got a large, and I don't want to be insensitive to people, but I'm going to say they have a large Southeast Asian population in America, from Vietnamese, and this goes back historically, Vietnamese, Chinese, the whole Tuti, Koreans, and so on. And so when people move, they move with their culture. I think this is always the big argument, like in Europe, around you know, people embracing democracy and not necessarily bringing all the bad stuff with them. And I mean, that can be a conversation point for another day. Yeah. So, I mean,
it's like you want the democracy, you want the Western values, you want the Western ideas, but then you basically just overtake it. Our common friend's family had to move 3 times out of London because they couldn't walk their dogs. Everywhere they went, it was, no, this is a Sharia park. You can't come here. So they had, sorry, maybe that accent was a bit, but you get the idea. Pardon?
No, I said yes, I'm agreeing with you. So just trying to think other good news out of the transnational organized crime stuff. So yeah, last week was, sorry.
No, carry on. I interrupted you. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so human trafficking, it's interesting. With obviously the what was it, the earthquake in Turkey and Syria has also had a
ripple,
kind of an impact on movement of people. So a lot of people in the last week or two, like the up-to-date numbers that from border, particularly border police and all of those in African countries and in particularly the Mediterranean area, and also because of the Russo-Ukrainian war, the whole migration and human trafficking thing has obviously been overtaken by that. So a lot of Ukrainians moving, and now like people going, okay, these countries have to think about, we've got Ukrainian refugees in the traditional African market. Interestingly, a whole lot of people from Venezuela and a couple of the other countries in South America are actually not trying to get to America. They're skipping and they actually getting ships and transport to West Africa, and then they make what we call the Sahelian run, which is to go through the Sahel and try and get into Libya or Tunisia, Morocco, and then try and do the hop into Europe.
Europe through Italy.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of that happening, but African trafficking, if you want to call it human trafficking, has dropped a bit. There's a lot more movement within Africa itself of human trafficking. So South Africa still tops out very highly, and particularly with the situation, the Zimbabwean residence permits with Home Affairs and that whole debate that's happening right now. There's a lot of movement. We're seeing it even in the park. There's a lot of movement. A lot of Zimbabweans are trying to get through, and they're panicking because right now, the figure quoted last week, Zimbabwe is sitting at about, in the formal economy, about 80% unemployment in the formal economy. So Zimbabwe is surviving on its informal economy right now. And then economies that are locked down, like mines and things like that, that are politically protected. So, overall, wildlife crime for South Africa is stabilized. And, good news as well. So the latest elephant census results that have come out in Africa, they haven't all been consolidated, but it looks like Southern Africa is holding the line. So from the Zambezi Kunene line down, we will probably soon have the largest population of African elephants in Africa. Further north, things are still quite challenging. Elephant poaching is stabilizing in Tanzania. That's always a good news story because they lost about 60% very quickly of their elephant population. So things are kind of on an up there. Mozambique, we're obviously keeping an eye on because in my sense, we border it very close here. I'm within about 70 kilometers of the Mozambican border as the crow flies. But yeah, we're keeping an eye on central and north Mozambique because we don't want Al-Sunna wa Juma and its ISIS affiliates to head down our way as well. So that's kind of some of the good news stuff. So we're holding the line. Obviously, like we keep on talking, you and I, and even off the shows, the biggest thing remains the demand side around how do we're disrupting the crime here, but how do we disrupt the demand back in Southeast Asia?
We need to tell them that snorting rhino horn does not make your pee-pee go stronger or longer or faster. It does not work. No matter what, or line teeth or...
And then some big news. The biggest private breeder, John Hume, from the Platinum Rhino Ranch. I mean, he's in his early 80s. He has put up his total rhino population, which I think at last count was about between 1,900 and 2,000. He's put it up for auction. I think the reserve price just to get in is 130 million rand to even just get into the auction. Just a bid. So I think a lot of people are watching him and watching like how things are going to go down with that because he hedged, and I'm sure people online will know. There's a very strong pro wildlife trade body groups out there that want to see expanded trade in wildlife. And my counter to it is, guys, we don't have the system or the capacity to do it. Even if we wanted to, even if we switched the green light on tomorrow morning and said, let there be legal trade in rhino horn. We don't have the capacity. This is not something that, and like we know, South Africans and even other countries, there's a trust deficit when it comes to government managing these processes and things like that. So there's lots of work that's got to be done.
Yeah. Corruption and
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah. Anyway, I don't know if
they I don't know. To me, with these space programs, I always scratch my head and think they know more about the stars and more about what's on the surface of the moon than they do about what's going on in our own backyards, with our animals. I mean, didn't they discover also recently some form of, I don't know what it was, like a wild dog or like something so rare that hasn't been shown. I think also somewhere in Africa was like some sort of species of wild dog. Maybe I'm talking nonsense. I'll look it up. I'll see if I can find it. But like we're discovering things, or it wasn't in India. I'm not sure. But yeah, these things are coming back to life, and it just I don't understand it. These are our lungs. Our oceans are our lungs. Our forests are our treasures. Why stuff around with things that fall apart, move? Look, it's beautiful. I highly respect astrophysicists. I think it's incredible discoveries of new galaxies and things, but we're not looking after. Yeah, we're not looking after our own. So it's just a little bit. We are, but we're not doing enough. We're not doing more than enough.
Well, it's that priorities thing. I think many of us, our priorities are different to that, and I kind of get why people want to. There's this urge to be an explorer, and funny enough, the actor, I can't remember the guy who played Captain Kirk in the original Star Trek series.
Okay, comments help, please. It's before my time, maybe a bit.
So
he's an old man now.
Yes, he's. I think he's in his early 90s. I think he went up with one of the three,
yes.
And he actually said when they got up there and they did their near orbital flight or whatever, he looked back and he kind of, it made him realize, although he'd been involved with Star Trek, yes, William Shatner, thanks.
It was also the voice of, this is 911. Remember we got that show in the 90s. This is 911. Yeah.
So William Shatner actually said it made him realize that we really do need to look after the earth, and all of this other exploration, which may be like, I suppose, quite entertaining, and the political prestige, like in the Cold War, Americans freaked out when the Russians got Yuri Gagarin up there, and then there was this whole kind of race to show off technology and who's got the motivation and industrial capabilities. But yeah, I totally agree. When we look at what's happening, we know that biodiversity makes a difference. I mean, there's so many stories and research that's proving people that get regular exposure to green spaces, it doesn't even have to be the Kruger Park, but just going to a park or having a nice garden. And this is like now very personal for me. So when I was working in government, and I used to bump into housing guys from the Department of Public Works, and I'd say to him, every time I go into low-income housing development, you guys never build parks. You make no space for lawns or green flowers, or there's no space. It's just like this, like the favelas in Brazil. It's like houses and houses. And yes, I mean, my adult life, the bulk of it, I've been living in the bush. So it's easy for me to say in a way. But when I think, no wonder people are a bit disconnected. And when you are connected, it can help you psychologically, your sense of well-being, and that kind of thing. And I think that's part of the problem. I'm not saying city life is bad. I'm just saying we've got to look at it differently. We've got to kind of think, how do we actually make sure that kids and people have a connection to the earth as well? And I'm not being overly philosophical or esoteric about it. I mean, there's very good reasons why as well.
No, of course. It's I thoroughly believe that. I mean, it was in the good book that you will look after it and take care of it, because if we don't, we end up not being here. I mean,
No, exactly.
I'm finding listening to Joe Rogan often and finding out that we've actually had many mass extinctions over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's just phenomenal to think, like, you think your bubble's only so big, but now you realize it's actually so big, and it's you have to. I think it's so joyous to be out with nature. To me, I love it. I think I couldn't. People say, "Yeah, I want to go to New York," and it's not on my bucket list. I think if someone offered me a free trip and we'd stay in a lovely place, and sure, great, wonderful, maybe I'd go. But it's not somewhere in particular. They've got one. I know it's massive. I think it's huge, Central Park. But that's it. That's it. It's just not not healthy. And okay, they've got a lot of these green gardens now on top of roofs and things like that. But there's nothing. Come to Africa, people. Go and visit your parks. It will give you. It's like seeing the ocean. It's just does something to your soul. It's good for you. So
no,
yes.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's something we've got to work towards, and particularly with people with families as well. And everybody might roll their eyes and think, it sounds quite naive, but we've got to make space in the now for the future, for what comes next, for those that follow us. And that's why, like the Kruger and national parks, they're there for several reasons, but one of them is actually our survival. It definitely benefits us to have the biodiversity in place, because our food crops, so much that we have now that we take for granted, whether it was corn from Central South America, potatoes from the Andes, that side, a lot of things that we take for granted now started out as wild foods and things like that. I mean, for the wine drinkers, I think it was Persia, if I remember correctly. Wine didn't come from France. They might have helped perfect it, but you kind of go, okay, guys, a lot of what we do day to day is derived from nature. And I know we talk about nature, the economy, and then social issues, those kind of things together. But that we have to have all three. You can't just focus on the one as well.
No, I think we should start a thing where we invite wealthy European Americans and Americans to come and be in places where there's no Wi-Fi signal, there's nothing. You just come and chill and be in the bush for a week. We'll make lots. We need to start a huge tourism. Sick and tired of picking up your phone 50 million times a day. Come to the bush. Put your phone away. I saw a crazy thing on, I think it was YouTube Shorts the other day. Have become so addicted to their phones that they've now made a little safe that locks your phone away from yourself, because people are so addicted. To me, I don't know. This weekend I literally put my phone away the entire weekend. It was great.
I find it like distracting with my studying and things like that, because you get into the mode of every 5 to 10 minutes you pick up your phone and check. Somebody was saying doom scrolling is what they call it. You just scroll and scroll and scroll, and today I was in a meeting, and it worked out really well. In this meeting, there was quite a few people, and we had a gathering, but all the tables had been taken out because they were needed for something else. So we were just sitting on seats and waiting for the person to have open the meeting. And what it did was it forced everybody to put their phones down on the floor and hold their notebooks. And it was amazing to see how uncomfortable people were, including myself. And I thought, okay, let me be present in the now, like focus on being present in the now. And then I looked at other people, and I could see their urge to pick up their phone and check. And it actually made the meeting a lot more productive, because then people weren't looking over the phones and scrolling through.
No, it's going to be the pandemic of our society, this phone business. This constant. We have a question. With the rain, is malaria going to be an issue visiting the Kruger in the next year or next season?
So normally summers, like mid to late summer, like now, it can be problematic. But remember, it's a low to medium risk region. So, and getting back to your earlier question, Ruth, what must be aware of, or don't forget, if you do have a child and you bring your child with you, just make sure that you spray Mozzie spray on them, and you just keep an eye out. But generally, this time of the year and going into autumn, just a little versus other regions. So we're not nearly as bad as further north, like in Zimbabwe and all of that. So it's not that bad. But again, if you get home after the Kruger, particularly if you go up north for a bit in a very wet season, and you start getting flu or cold-like symptoms, go for a test. They're not expensive. Go for a test and just double check. Yeah, I mean, my mom, she didn't finish her medication, and I always told her, like, Zimbabwe, if you're going for holiday, take the prophylactics for malaria. And she stopped halfway. That's the other hint for everybody. Finish your medication. Don't just go along and then think, you know what, I'm back home in Joburg or Cape Town, it's fine now, I'm not going to finish it. If you don't, you make the malarial parasite, the Vivaxii parasite, more resilient.
And it's like an antibiotic.
Yeah, so you must finish your prophylactics. The other thing, this is a naughty one, check yourself for ticks. When you in the bush, go into the shower, check all the naughty bits in your body. Make sure you check, or get somebody to help you to check in the shower, because I've just actually had a visitor from the UK coming out, and he sent me a message, said, I've never had a tick on me before. And he's actually a doctor, a GP. Yeah. So I said, okay, so you found one? And he said, yeah. And I managed to get it out, and it didn't leave its head behind. And I said, that's great. But did you check the rest of yourself? He said, no. I said, okay, well, go to the shower, have a nice shower, and it's easier. And then dig around a bit and everything. So
dig around. I have a good old scratch in the patch.
Yeah.
No, listen, I mean, I actually know a lady who suffered with malaria, and she's in a wheelchair today. She's got the mind of a 14-year-old, not younger, even 12. She's like a little girl, because she got it, and she got it bad, and it got too late, so they couldn't treat her.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the thing. The cerebral malaria, which is the nasty one, we don't really get it down here.
That's, I think, what she did. She was far north. She traveled the whole of Africa. Yeah.
So cerebral malaria, if you go north of South Africa, like into Zambia, northern Zim, and parts of that line, the Zambezi Kunene line is always a good line. When you go above that parallel, you must be careful, because cerebral malaria really it almost attacks your meninges in your brain, and your organs, so organ failure, without sounding really nasty or, I mean, yeah, if you catch it too late, and that's what my mom had. And I was in the bush, and she said, I'm feeling fluey. And then she phoned me, and I remember I had one of those really old 1610 Nokias with the aerial. And she phoned me, yeah, and she's like, I can't get out of the car. I'm at the clinic. I was like, what do you mean? She said, no, I can't physically get out. So got hold of my stepfather and was at Linksfield Clinic in Joburg. I said, you need to drive from Bedford View, go to mom now. And she can't walk to get into the clinic. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an awesome holiday. I mean, it's people say, oh, what's the chance? What's the percentage? Come and enjoy your holiday, get into the bush, make sure you look after yourself, spray for mozzies. In winter, wear longer sleeve clothes as well. If it makes a difference. And of course, things like if you don't go into the sun often, so in summer in the Kruger can be really, really hot. So just skin protection, drink lots of water. Don't fall into the trap of what I call the booze cruise in the Kruger. People are just drinking beer and Coke and brandy and whatever. You can actually get yourself into trouble. It's just stay hydrated. That is good. And the water generally in the Kruger is drinkable out of the taps and that kind of thing. So you don't have to worry about buying bottled water unless somebody has a very specific taste as well. So yeah, this time of year is always good. And advice, people want to see cats. Obviously winter is a great time to look for leopards and lions, just because the vegetation's thinner and you tend to get animals much closer to water points, like the big stuff, ellies and rhino and buffalo, and those kind of things. If you're a birder, then this time of the year is the time to come, because the migrants are here from Europe. You seeing cuckoos and all sorts of things. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. It's always lovely having you. As you know, we could do another hour just chatting about this and that. But yeah, you've got your studying and your work to go to, and I don't want to keep your time. Your time is precious.
Thank you. No, I really appreciated it. Yeah. Whenever we want to do another one, we absolutely can do another one, and I'll try and keep track of some of the new stuff so we can also keep it like valuable for people as well. Okay.
Brilliant.
And thanks everybody for coming on and listening, and the questions as well.
Yeah, always from the expert. Yay. Cool. Stay on for 2 minutes. I'm going to say cheers to everybody. Thanks for joining, guys. Have an awesome weekend. TTFN. Bye.